farmers need to keep their livelihood going, and they will go to the lengths of what they need to keep the business.
But still, there's always someone, such a, interlinking process that it's hard to just do the right thing.
Look, the bottom line again is this: the studies have been done. We've got a healthy chilled meat halal trade going on. This is not necessary. It is not necessary for our economy. Farmers have ample opportunities and ample markets in which they can tap into, and that's just the way it is.
Good.
That's
bottom line.
That's fact. That's not opinion. That's fact.
That's fact.
Okay.
Well, that solves that problem. Good one. All right, everyone. Now that you know that, then you can have a good
we can
think
act accordingly.
Think about why we're still treating animals like crap just because of money.
Okay, cool. Let's get a bit more locally. Let's get a bit more to now. What as Animals Australia down now? I was reading up on what you guys did with the pigs. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Make it possible.
Make it possible.
So the Make It Possible campaign is really just getting Australians, and it's actually gone international as well, to make a pledge to no longer support factory farming. And it's become a very successful campaign, a very high profile campaign, and it's really good because it shows that the Australian public, once they are informed, are taking positive steps in which to action that. And there's a few issues at play that were sort of preventing that from happening. So and this campaign is really sort of driving that message. And the issue is what happens behind these factory farms is very hidden from the community. And the fact that goods are not being labelled adequately means that the consumer is actually misinformed. And it goes back to that point again. Nobody wants to see an animal suffer. Nobody wants to see an animal deprived of its natural behaviours and living a wretched existence. So once people become informed and empowered, they will make the right choices.
Or even being fed artificial product, even if it is grain or hormone juice grain. I mean, in Woolworths, for example, they don't label really any of their meat in any different ways. Coles is starting to. You go to Aldi and it's like grass-fed beef, this beef. Like they're actually all completely labelled as in like you know what you're buying.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go with consumer labelling. We really do. We truly do. And it's not just animal welfare. It's health as well. Use of antibiotics. It's environmental impact. It's all that sort of stuff. And the consumer wants to know. They want to know what they're investing in. What they're purchasing.
The issue is that the disconnection between our food on our plate and where it's come from, and especially with the animal issue, if people if they only knew and saw what was going on, they would not be letting it happen, and that's what's caused this whole problem.
I think that the scary thing is, like, when you think about it, we are eating more and more meat, and we are, there's some very worrying studies about the Australian population becoming a little bit obese, and so we're eating so much more of a lot of things: eggs, dairy, meat, all of it.
Certainly.
Where are the animals? When you drive down a country road, where are the pigs and where are the chickens? People really need to start thinking about where are they? Where is it actually coming from? Well, the answer is they're in sheds. Locked away, hidden away from view of consumers. So that's the beauty behind this Make It Possible campaign. It's basically opening the doors to the consumer and saying, here you go, this is what you'd be buying. Do you want to think about it?
I just was reading a book about food in Australia and just about, talking about the animals being locked away in sheds. Because I think there's lights on most of the time, aren't there? Lights on all the time. And this book was saying that they have to have drills where they every now and then make the lights go off for a period of time so that the animals get used to an emergency if the power goes out. Like they're having emergency lights out.
Well, to show you, and just to show you how unnatural the existence of these poor animals is. If you look at caged hens, it's all in the lighting. It plays a big part of it because the hens are laying eggs. Naturally they lay eggs according to the environment that they're in. The sun's up, the sun's down, etc., etc. It's called forced molting, where they play around with the lighting so that they're producing more eggs. And it's all,
it's ridiculous.
And they have to train them to not freak out about the darkness. Isn't that?
I have a serious soft spot for chickens because I had about 7 when I was younger, and we had one.
They're clever little things, aren't they?
Yeah, they responded to voice. Very
clever. Very inquisitive.
Yeah, definitely. And they used to follow you around just like a dog, and you just had to walk up and say, guys, it's time to go to bed, and they used to go up and we had one that lasted the runt of the pack, who always used to get picked on by all the others. She lasted out all of them, and for 13 years she was
goodness.
13 years, and Mum used to actually I shouldn't even be saying this on there.
What was her name?
Baby, and she used to get arthritis. Mum used to get emu oil and put it on her feet.
That's beautiful.
I know, because it was about a sad day when she did. But they've actually all got an individual personality, and
of course they do.
When you see how they're just kept, caged eggs is well, and Coles has given up selling them.
So
I think Woolworths still sell them.
Is that what this campaign Make It Possible has done? Is that the direct influence of that with working with Coles?
Well, that's what would fall out of it. But at the end of the day, it's really appealing to the individual to say, here's information, get informed, now make a decision. And so many people are making the pledge. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
That is good.
Yeah.
But okay, so where else have we wanted? We had so many topics to talk about here.
Well, I think it's probably important just to round off the discussion about factory farming because a lot of people don't also understand why we can treat one animal a certain way and other animals. If we do that same animal in a different scenario or a different animal in that scenario, we be in trouble. That would be considered animal cruelty.
Absolutely.
So just very basically, I mentioned earlier that animal law or animal protection is a state-based responsibility. So if you think about all the different states, they're responsible for their own animal welfare legislation. Now, every state pretty much has an Animal Welfare Act, and that act says, you can't be cruel to an animal, you can't starve an animal, you can't beat an animal, you can't not provide it with water, you have to provide it with adequate living conditions, adequate exercise, etc., etc.
Sure.
So that's great. But there's this one clause in every single act around Australia that says, if it's a production animal, being an animal used for food, and some animals in entertainment and various other things, but essentially production animals, they're pretty much exempted from that act.
Wow.
And you can do certain things to that animal that would be a defence to cruelty under this one.
Yeah.
So they come under something called a code of practice. Okay, so there are codes of practice then that govern how we treat pigs and chickens and cows and various other things, various other beings that we use in production purposes. And so it's those codes that say, yes, you can put 5 hens in a cage as long as each hen essentially has at least 3/4 of a sheet of A4 paper in space. You can
A4 sheet of paper.
And when they're chicks, when they're hatched, they're debeaked. They're machines that sort of rotate. You can imagine like when you get your shoes repaired and they sort of round off and file the heel. That's how they debeak chicks, baby chicks. And the reason they debeak them is because they're essentially going into intensive conditions, either as a meat chicken or a caged chicken or a barn chicken, and they get annoyed with each other. They're all living on top of each other. They're cramped, they're stressed, and they might peck at each other.
Certainly.
And so also with piglets living in factory farms, you can remove their teeth and dock their tails without anaesthetic. As a piglet, and that's okay under the law. Again, that's preparing them for a factory farm environment because they start to bite at their tails in these sorts of environments because they're stressed out, and again, they're living on top of each other. So the law basically says that we can do these things to animals in production farm purposes. However,
make it efficient for costs.
It's economies of scale.
It's all about money. It's all about money. It's always the environment and the animals that have to pay the cost of price corner cutting.
Right.
I think where you can relate it back to the consumer, when you go and buy this caged chicken and eat it and that sort of thing, when these animals go through stress, their brain is obviously releasing toxins to their body, which, and I have a personal belief, I don't think this is found a study or anything, but that this is probably one of the major causes of cancer throughout the world. Like, that you're eating animals that have been put through massive amounts of stress.
But also, it's the natural stress, but it's also what they're injected with, growth hormones and antibiotics, because they are living in unnatural conditions, and they've been forced to grow at a rate that's completely unnatural for their bodies. And if you look at, like KFC, for example, they use a lot of broiler chickens in their food. They're all intensively reared. So they're basically, in massive sheds, and living on top of each other. Not caged, they're free range. However, they don't really have very much room to move because they're all sort of on these barn floors. Now, they are typically killed after about 6 weeks, but they're pumped with growth hormones that their bodies are growing full grown. That's how quickly they grow.
Incredible.
And unfortunately, it's not uncommon to see a lot of them with horrible body conditions because your body is growing at such your bones aren't catching up. So a lot of them have broken hips, broken legs because their legs actually can't carry the weight of their bodies.
So I think the meat, the bones in chickens are a lot thinner and softer than you would find like an organic free range chicken that's had a long time to grow.
So I've been to there's a rescue sanctuary in New South Wales that I went to a few years ago, and they had a few rescued broiler meat chickens that they took off a farm that was contracted to grow chickens for KFC, and they had rescued a couple, and they actually couldn't walk, and so they had them set up in this gorgeous little, like a little dog bed, and wherever they needed to go, they had to be carried. Why? Because their bodies their legs could never keep up with their bodies, and they had broken legs and broken hips. But the sanctuary just wanted to make sure that they lived out the rest of their days in comfort and dignity. And so you just look at that animal and go, why? Why is this necessary?
So KFC there's no way that they are close to using anything free range.
I think intermittently they've brought out, their version of a free range burger or wrap. But I mean, again, what does that mean? The questions need to be asked, and the consumer needs to become informed.
Is there strict guidelines of what free range labelling means?
The code of practice that I mentioned earlier has minimum requirements, which is still rather unacceptable because they are geared towards the producer. So they're geared towards, well, how far can we push this to still ensure economies of scale, but not quite get into the realm of,
Certainly.
But it's still, I mean, look what's happening. Factory farming is rife and it's legal, so it needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
Well, Tess, you actually, that was a factory farm. She
Yeah.
actually did work.
I did work experience at a piggery.
At a piggery.
At a pig farm. Yeah.
How did you find that?
Well, I was a lot younger. I was like 19, and so to be honest, I felt pretty numb to the whole thing. I as much as I obviously cared about animals my whole life, but I didn't feel like there was anything wrong going on.
So they had sows in the stalls?
They did, and obviously you can think, that's not the most ideal thing, but it seems so normal. When you walk in there, it all just looks like...
Because you've got the conception of the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, maybe, but also because it's so obviously that these animals aren't animals to us at the moment. They're in a shed.
They're machines.
And that's their purpose. I get what's going on here, and it's like I just sort of forgot that they are creatures. But there was, obviously when I did get blown away by the whole little baby thing, little pigs. Like they have these huge mums and they'll like sit on them, and there's little dead piglets sort of in the side of the sows, and you're like, what? And then when they get a little bit sick, they just, this one's a bit sick, it's walking a bit wobbly, they just grab it by the legs and then they go outside, whack it on the concrete to kill it and just chuck it in the pit. And then sometimes your job is to go and empty the pit of dead pigs and put it over into the real pit, which is where there's just bones and skulls of pigs everywhere. That's pretty crazy.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's the whole like respect of life is just not there. There's none of that. It's not about life.
But it's also
just creatures.
Just having absolutely no consideration for the fact that they are sentient beings.
Yes,
and they
exactly.
suffer and they bleed and they feel fear and pain.
And that's what.
And that's and the law sort of has come on top of that and made it worse because it's sort of it's almost, what's the word? Not schizophrenic, maybe just hypocritical. It's just the best example I can give you is a puppy.
Sure.
So there's a lot of controversy obviously about puppy farms and about buying animals from pet shops.
I've never even heard of puppy farms, so I read your website.
Okay, there you go.
They're a puppy farm.
Oh, puppy factories, I like to call them.
Factories.
Because they are factories. They're no different to the chicken factories and the pig factories that we've just spoken about. And again, it comes back to this thing about production animals.
Yes.
Under the eyes of the law.
So
it's not a domestic animal. It's not a domestic animal.
Puppies for pets aren't considered as domestic animals until they're sold.
No, so it's about, what are you doing with this animal? Are you bringing it into your home to love it as your domestic pet, or are you going to breed from it and be a registered business?
So if money's
and profit from it, then it becomes a production animal.
So money gives you this amazing right.
Well, it absolves you, basically gives you that free kick to get under the code of practice. I mean, look, you can't beat it, you can't starve it, you can't set it on fire. Like you've got basics that you have to comply with, but essentially, the life of that animal becomes it's a machine. It becomes a breeding machine or something that produces something for you that you profit from. So, and that's why puppy farms, I mean, they're out of control and they're illegal in many regards, but they are allowed to operate in the first instance in that manner with cages and all that sort of stuff because of the fact that they've then become production animals.
Maybe I'm being naive, but shouldn't, if you're profiting out of another species, you should be looking after it more so than what you would have if you would.
Correct. But I mean, these puppies are pretty much ripped from their mothers. It's a known fact, right, that a lot of animals that get bought, puppies that get bought from pet shops, because they're taken from their mothers at such a young age and they're born into these horrendous conditions, it's the first few weeks of a puppy's life is when they're taught their behaviours. So a lot of them actually have behavioural issues that are very difficult to correct, and that's why ultimately they get dumped at the RSPCA or the pound, because families buy them, bring them home, and then as they start to grow, they can't train them and they're out of control, and so they just dump them. Or they decide that their lifestyle is not conducive to having an animal in the first place. So it actually it gives rise to a lot more issues, and also health issues as well. Because they're bred so intensively, if there's a particular genetic issue with that line, it's not corrected because they're just being pumped out and being sold between $500 to $1,200 a pop.
Certainly.
And they're not chipped, they're not registered, so it's very difficult to track it back to that original breeder.
Yeah.
So once you've bought it,